Welcome to Women's Health Unwrapped with Nicola Farndell, a weekly show dedicated to empowering women to unlock the secrets of true health and vitality. Join us as we unwrap what healthy living really means with guest experts and real-life stories to help you get clear on the power of building sustainable, healthy habits without the overwhelm and confusion you feel right now. It's time to strip back and lay out the truth about why taking better care of yourself is the answer to the happy, vibrant life you're striving so hard to create. Hi and welcome to today's episode of Women's Health Unwrapped. I'm joined today by a wonderful guest, Kate Hall, who is going to chat about something that I know will be of interest to hopefully every single one of you listening, because I know it's something that is a massive barrier to you eating healthier. Yes, we're talking about food today. Meal planning, prepping, batch cooking, all of those things that I just constantly hear are a big, big headache and struggle, whether it's time, your ability, money, just all of your family requirements. So there's a bit of a twist to how we're going to talk about this today with Kate, because Kate's an expert on optimising your freezer to reduce waste, to save money, to have less stress, to get more organised and be able to feed yourself and your family healthier food, hitting so many boxes, which are those ones that, as I said, are big barriers to many of you being able to improve your diet for everyone in your home. So I'm excited for the conversation because personally I'm a fan of Kate, who runs the Full Freezer and is a best-selling author of the Full Freezer Method book, which I have right here next to me. And Kate's a bit of a social media influencer, I'd say, and I did notice that one of your recent reels has had 1.8 million views, so it went massively viral. Kate's been on lots of TV programs chatting all about this, so yeah, I just think it's such an interesting topic and a different dynamic to bring to the whole conversation about meal planning and prepping and batch cooking. So welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicola, for such a lovely introduction. It's really kind. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, as I said, I am. And I remember when I first heard about what you do, I kind of sniggered and thought, a freezer methodology process, and she's helping people to maximize their freezer. What's this all about? And then as I started following tips, I've used a lot of them, and I'm sure that will come out through our conversation. But just to kick us off, I'd love to know from you in your own wellness toolkit what your most impactful habit is that helps you to feel good.
I mean, to be honest, I have very much lent in only quite recently, probably in the last 6 months, into this whole not plant-based diet in terms of, I am a meat eater and everything like that, but like the 30 plants a week.
Yeah.
And using my freezer to facilitate that. So I wasn't specifically trying to do this all through kind of the start of the year, but I actually started working with someone quite recently to just zone in on what I'm eating and how I'm moving my body and everything. And I started writing down, keeping that diary of what am I eating day to day. And I was really shocked to discover that trying to aim for the 30 plants a week, I'd actually hit 50 in a week with very little effort. And I found that shift in my diet of just trying to up kind of the plant intake, whether it's fruits and vegetables or seeds and nuts or pulses or whatever it is, not, as I say, not cutting out meat, but just trying to get more of that natural stuff and the less processed stuff. It's just making me feel so much better. And as somebody who was a fussy eater growing up, and I grew up on plain baked potatoes and Haribo, so it's not like I've always been a foodie or I'm the girl that's got all the recipes. Like I cook for my family. I've developed recipes and things that work for us, and I'm quite proud of how I've I've progressed in the way that we eat. But that thing of zoning in on like, am I actually like how many plants am I actually consuming, and how much processed stuff am I actually eating? And I found that focusing in as well on what I'm eating, not just in our dinners, but what am I having for breakfast? What am I having for lunch? Has actually really helped me in portion sizes as well. Because I think, even just a few months ago, I was very guilty of overeating in the evenings because it was the only really interesting meal that we were having. I was very much in a habit of having the same thing for breakfast, the same thing for lunch. And mixing that up has actually made a huge difference. And I'm seeing it through my own energy levels, through shifting a few, I'm not out to lose lots of weight, but shifting weight that has been very persistent for a very long time, that's just kind of slowly just fallen away, because of those little changes around bringing more plants in and just playing with the portions and the variety.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, actually, I could just now do a whole podcast episode on expanding on what you've shared there, because I'm a massive advocate of the 30 plants a week. And we're recording this on Wednesday. And I was really smug last night eating our dinner, literally counting them, because I'd started this the beginning of last year. So it's been quite a long time, but I really dug into it more this year. And last week I decided that I was going to track it a bit more formally. And last night, Tuesday night, I'd already hit 30, and I was like, this, Kev, my husband thinks that I'm crazy because I'm sitting as we're eating, going, oh my God, this meal's got 9 different plants in, and it's much easier than what people realise. But I also love how you've shared that focusing in on this has shifted some of those habits around what you were eating, and then the changes you've positively seen with things like your energy around that. Because, and I think this will come through, I'm sure, in our conversation, so many people stick to the same kinds of foods and meals that they're comfortable with, and diversity is a massive piece of building a balanced, nutritious diet. We need that diversity, not just day to day, but week to week, and trying new foods. So yeah, that's a really brilliant thing to be doing and able to share and see the benefit of as well, isn't it?
Totally. And I think, it is hard to do if you are, if you're buying a lot of things that you're not familiar with. Like, I remember, 2 years ago, I think I bought a bag of chia seeds, and they just sat in my cupboard for a year because it was like, I don't know what they're for. I don't understand. And then as I've kind of started to get to grips with okay, plants, seeds, just eat them. It's good for you. Just include them in things like your porridge. And, you don't have to like chia seed pudding and stuff, which I personally think looks like popcorn. It's not my cup of tea. But, that thing of, I think, finding ways to enjoy those different foods that you enjoy, that you can integrate them in a way that feels familiar, that doesn't feel scary. And for me, like, the freezer has completely facilitated that, because there's no fear of me wasting anything, because anything that I'm using a bit of, and if I'm a bit uncertain at first, it's like, well, it's okay, I can put it in the freezer and then I'll come back to it and I'll figure out different ways to use it. And I think, it's hard to step outside of your comfort zone initially, but as you start to just put a toe out, just, slowly, I think you can see massive improvements from just very small changes. It's just about starting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to dig into why you're so passionate about the freezer, because you did touch on your history, which I've heard you talk about and share, that you weren't a foodie. As you said, as a kid, you were a terrible eater, and that changed at some point. So yeah, how did you get this passion for food and then think about the freezer as a part of that?
So, gosh, yes. So, I mean, the food side of things, yes, I was a nightmare until probably about 19. So it wasn't just like being a little kid and being a fussy eater. Like, it was basically until I went to university, and I was so embarrassed, basically, that I knew I had to just, try a curry, try a lasagna. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but like at 20 years old, I hadn't ever had lasagna because it was just far too much for me, far too many flavors and textures and everything. But I definitely, I sort of had my safety foods. So I would eat things like bolognese, and I think I'd had chili and things like that. But my mum would cook at home. And I actually got into the freezing because I was actually really ill in my early 20s. So I had blood clots in my shoulders. I had 3 blood clots over a 4-year period, and was diagnosed with a condition called thoracic outlet syndrome, which is basically where your vein, or it can also be your nerves, but your vein or your nerves kink like a hose pipe underneath your ribs, and the blood can't flow through, and it causes these blood clots. And off the back of that, my mum, bless her, after the first blood clot, she came to the flat that I was living in London as part of a placement year for university. And she filled this little freezer, this little tabletop freezer, with batch cooked meals. And it was like 101 things you can do with mince. So it was bolognese, it was the chili. I think by that point I was eating lasagna, cottage pie. It was just those standard, like, these are the meals that you batch cook. Everything is beef mince. And that, that did me a huge favor, because it familiarized me with the idea that I could be prepared for more difficult days. So I would eat those meals on the days when I was really struggling. And then on the days when I was feeling better, I would restock the freezer. And I knew that it was sort of there like a comfort blanket, that, I'd always have a bit of home cooked food, if I couldn't cook for myself. And that continued for pretty much over a decade, through all the different phases of working long hours and meeting my partner and getting married and having our first child. And like, I was batch cooking queen when we had our first child. Like, I with my mum's help, we made, I think it was about 85 meals, something like that, for the freezer. It was about 10 12 different dishes, and by that point we'd expanded, beyond just things made with mince. So we've got curries and things in there too, and that was fantastic. And it was fantastic batch cooking for my little girl and all of my NCT group when she was tiny. But then when we had our son, which was about 2.5 years later, we moved house when he was 5 weeks old. So the freezer was empty. And I would basically keep on buying all the nice, fresh ingredients with good intentions, that it's like, right, this week I'm going to cook from scratch. This week I'm going to batch cook and restock the freezer. And instead, the baby would be crying, the toddler would be crying, I would be crying. It was just, especially in those early days, like, it was just survival for me. I was so sleep deprived, that planning any food was just beyond my reach. And we ended up resorting so much to sling in the oven meals, takeaways, just anything, even a bowl of porridge. It was like, I can't face standing at the stove. And it was when our son got to about 9 months old that we basically hit the point of financially not being able to afford to keep on wasting in the way we were. Like, at that point, I had no idea of the environmental impact, which is now something that I talk about a lot, around the negative impact of food waste. But at that point for us, it was literally, we cannot afford to keep buying food, filling the fridge, letting it go off, and buying a takeaway or buying a sling in the oven meal. And like, I'm gluten free as well. So sling in the oven meals when you're gluten free are not cheap and cheerful options. Like, it is expensive. And I just had a light bulb moment one evening where I thought, well, hang on a minute, if I can freeze a meal that I've cooked using ingredients, surely I could just press pause on those ingredients. If I know I'm not going to get to them in time, if I have got 2 minutes whilst the baby's napping and the toddler's having a biscuit. And I can see those, I go into the fridge and I can see those peppers going, you're not going to use us. I know you're just going to throw us away at the end of the week. If I could just take 2 minutes to go, right, I'll just chop those up. I'll get, wash them, dry them, chop them up, get them into the freezer. Then gradually over time, I built up what I now refer to as my freezer stash, which was all of those ingredients, all of those foods that in the past would have slowly, one by one, gone into my food bin. And I probably, would have left them in the bottom of the fridge until they're like fully bendy, all shriveled up, that it's like, just to reduce the guilt, that it's like, well, no one could have possibly eaten this because it doesn't even look like food. And it was like that satisfaction that came with just, as I say, just pressing pause on those ingredients as and when I could throughout the day. And if I was having a good day, it might be that I was cooking dinner. And, say if I had a pack of 3 peppers, instead of using 1 pepper and 2 going in the fridge, I could use 1 pepper and chop up the other 2 for the freezer. Or I could even, nowadays, I use 1/3 of each colour pepper, because I understand now that classify as 3 different plants. So,
Yes.
adds to my repertoire of plants. And yeah, building up that stash and starting to realise that it's like, well, I've now got enough ingredients in the freezer that would have gone in the bin, that mean I can cook a meal without having to get a chopping board out. Like, a lot of it is literally just, grab a handful of onion, peppers, courgette, mushrooms, whatever it might be, and chuck it in the pan or chuck it in the air fryer. And getting that control where I don't need to go to the shop. I don't need to plan the meal. I can listen to my body in terms of what do I actually fancy eating? Like, what do I actually want? What meal is going to satisfy me in this moment? And getting that flexibility it just totally changed the game for us. It completely kind of revolutionized the way that I was cooking in the kitchen, the way that we were in terms of budgeting and saving money. I wasn't having to think or do big shopping lists. I would just buy ingredients we loved, and then go, well, I'll cook this one thing that we've got in mind with these ingredients, but all these leftover bits and pieces, let's tuck those away for another day, and then I can decide how I want to use them when I feel like using them. I mean, to be fair, I did also do food safety training, because I was terrified of making us sick. And I am one of the people that would freeze chicken and it would never come out of the freezer, because I'm not organised enough to defrost it in the fridge. And I didn't know how to do it safely and quickly, which thankfully I can say there are ways to do that. And there's total out there. So yeah, if you're listening and you're not an organised person, don't worry, you don't have to be to use the freezer. There's ways around it. That I'll definitely say. So yeah, I know that was a very long and roundabout way, but it honestly, getting sick and having those challenges around eating myself have really, they totally laid the foundations for what I do now, and why the freezer to me is just so integral and such an underused appliance in so many houses. Like, I think once people start to tap into just how much they can freeze, and just how much money they can save, and how much variety they can enjoy, it's a whole different world. Like, it's really geeky, but it's geeky in a really satisfying way.
And I know when we've chatted, one of the things that I really liked, and that I think can be helpful for someone listening, is that you are a self-confessed unorganized person when it comes to food. You mentioned when you were just chatting there how you aren't going food shopping with a great big plan of what you need for the week. And this is what I help people to do, is realise that we can all be different, but we can all still achieve the same outcome of stronger health. Like, I do like to meal plan, and I like to write a shopping list for the meal plan, and I like to cook. And I've always been someone that actually wastes very little, because I do a lot of batch cooking and I do freeze, but I generally would freeze the foods I'd cooked. And I may freeze some odd ingredients as raw ingredients, especially meat and fish. But I've learned other tips from you to avoid some of that waste. But I love that you're saying, not everyone has to plan ahead for the full week's meals. You can optimize eating healthy by having that stash, as you call it, in your freezer. Because one of the things that I hear, and you'll hear this, is, women say, oh, but it takes too much time. And not everyone does a full shop. Some people shop online and they get the basics, but then they look in the cupboard and go, there's nothing to eat, and then it's kind of stress after work, tired, kids are hungry, they're hungry, ratty, let's order a takeaway. And so I love how you're explaining there that opening the freezer will guarantee you've got things to put together. So there's so much I want to unpick, but what I wanted to get you to explain to begin with is to summarize your full freezer method. What is this thing you're putting out there, teaching and selling people, basically to give them the penny drop moment of, oh my goodness, yes, I can use the freezer and I can eat healthier because of that?
Sure. So the full freezer method is essentially 5 steps. So the book takes you through the 5 steps, but very briefly, they are to organize and sort of actually first to actually recognize your freezer as something that can be useful to you, and recognize what's working for you and what's not. Because I think that thing of exactly what you've just said, that if meal planning and batch cooking works for you, fantastic, that's brilliant. And it's, they're brilliant techniques to use, and especially when it comes to health, I think, and not getting the decision fatigue. I think it's really, really helpful. But I think also for the people who are not that way inclined, to have the reassurance that it's not that we're failing. It's not that we're not as good as somebody else, or, that it's not even sometimes that, because I talk about myself not being organized, which I'm not. But I've come from a place of negativity with that to a place of empowerment, that it's like, actually, it's not that I can't be organized, it's that I don't want to. I don't want to decide on Monday what I'm going to eat on Thursday. It just doesn't work for me, and that's okay, because the methodology and the full freezer method that underlies that facilitates it. It means it's not stressful for me, it's not broken. And so the first step is essentially identifying what's working for you and what's not. So looking at how you're shopping, do you shop online, do you go in store, do you make lists, do you not, and just identifying what's working, what's really not working. And then with that in mind, going through the rest of the process, which is essentially organizing and clearing down your freezer so you can make space going forwards, to be able to use it in a more effective way. Because the first thing that everybody says is, oh, well, I've only got 3 drawers and they're absolutely rammed, so I can't do it. And it's like, well, actually, if you follow my clear down process, most people are amazed how much space they've got once they remove things like ice packs and packaging. That usually there's actually quite a lot of space that can be used, and you can usually use the space far more effectively. I then take people through the process of essentially building up their freezer stash. So I share a lot of advice around thinking about how you're freezing things. So obviously the usual thing you said about freezing meat and fish, the thing that most people would do is you buy the meat, you buy the fish, you put it in the packaging in the freezer as it is. The way that I change that is I say, okay, well, if you're going to use those 4 chicken breasts in one go, and if you are somebody who meals plans and can get that out of the fridge in advance for it to defrost in time, which is going to take a while, that's fine, that's great. But if you're the person like I was, who would put the 4 chicken breasts in the freezer and then that's basically where they go to die. They're not coming out because you're not going to be organized enough to defrost them ahead. And because they are clumped together in a pack, they're taking up loads of space. They're just going to end up freezer burnt. You're not going to use them. Instead, I will say, okay, we'll start with the end in mind. So actually, are you going to need a whole chicken breast? Are you going to, are you going to want one chicken breast at a time? So if you're doing a pasta dish, you're not necessarily going to need a chicken breast per person. You might only even need half a chicken breast, dependent on how much you're bumping up your plant intake and everything. You might just want a little bit of meat. So I will do things like advise people around butterflying chicken breasts, freezing them individually. So with the butterflying, just cutting it in the middle and flapping it open so it's really thin, and then freezing that flat on a tray in a freezer bag, with sort of all the air squeezed out, so that when you want to come to use it, it will defrost really quickly. So you can pop it in a dish of cold water. You can microwave it using the defrost function and then cook it immediately. Although with the chicken breast, I probably wouldn't go for that. But if you have something like chicken thighs that you might have cut up into small pieces and frozen open on a tray, away from anything that you could cross-contaminate with, always have to put that in there. Always freeze raw meat away from ready-to-eat things. But, if you've frozen, so sometimes I will freeze, if I buy chicken thigh portions, I might freeze a few of them sort of unfolded and flat as full thighs, but I also would chop them up into small pieces because I know that I'm going to use them in things like curry. And I can grab just a handful, however much I want, from a freezer bag once they're all frozen as individual bits. And I can defrost those in 5 minutes on low in the microwave, and then immediately transfer them to the pan, and dinner is good. In the time I've cooked the rice, I've defrosted the chicken, I've cooked the vegetables from frozen, and I've got a home cooked meal. So yeah, the method is taking you through organizing that space, utilizing that space, and then utilizing the stash of ingredients that you've frozen as well. And then the final step is basically getting over any of those hurdles. So things like not having a big enough freezer, or being put off by, well, what if there's a power cut, or what if my freezer isn't working very well, or something like that. I sort of take the reader through all of those elements to just give that reassurance that yes, okay, there are things that might get in the way, but even if you literally just picked one thing that you wanted to start pressing pause on, even if you identify from your food waste, like we always throw away spinach, for example, like either making the decision to buy frozen spinach if that's a product that could work for you, or going, no, I like my spinach as a salad, I'm going to use what I want, but actually I can freeze the rest of it and use that in smoothies or curries or risottos or whatever it might be. Just picking those little things can make a huge difference over time. And it's a bit like changing your diet and introducing the plants and all of that, but like just getting started, just doing a little bit. And I find with the freezer, it starts to get quite addictive. Like once you've started and you start seeing things going in the bin. And I always encourage people, like, as they're throwing, like I've had quite a few messages from people going, oh, you're like that little monkey on my shoulder, going, oh, you can freeze that. You can freeze that. Don't throw it in the bin. You can freeze that. And like most things you can, there's over 700 foods in the book, all in sort of handy reference tables with kind of instruction there through icons on how to, and all of that, and then more specifics in some of the chapters. And I think it is that thing of when you start to see that stash building up and you start to see your food bills going down, and you access more variety, it is quite an addictive process if it's something that works for you, if you like that flexibility.
I think from what you're explaining, there's two things I hope people are picking up. One is you can freeze things as soon as you've bought them as a way to make sure that you've got things to hand. So especially if you're buying, say, bigger packs of chicken, and you're trying to economise, and, some of the veg, like you get a huge bag of carrots, maybe you don't use carrots very often and things like that. So right at the start, you could go, okay, I know I won't be using all of this, so I'm going to freeze it, and then I know it's going to be there over the next few weeks to use. Or the second part of it is food that you haven't got to use after a few days, and you're seeing probably, as you said, will die a slow death stuck somewhere in the fridge. you can freeze that, and know that you aren't wasting it. And we know over the last few years how much our food shopping bills have gone up, how many people do struggle with the cost of food, and there is a perception that eating healthy costs too much money as well. I think that's a barrier we hear from a lot of people, don't we? And I think, that's a whole other conversation. I think you are able to eat very healthy on a low budget. This is certainly a tool that you could use to help support that. And the waste element that you talk about as well, Kate's really important, because many of us are much more aware of sustainability now and what we're doing to the environment, especially with food waste. And it does horrify me how much some people throw away. I've had friends over the years, and even food that they've cooked. So we've, I think, so far really been, talking about tips to freeze fresh produce before it withers and molds and so on. But you can cook food and then freeze that. And I know people who are really like fib with that like, no, it doesn't taste the same, or I just don't ever use it. And actually this brings up a quote I wanted to give from Kate's book. She says, for most people, the freezer is quite simply where food goes to die. And I think that's something people have learned and go, no, there's no point me freezing it because I just don't ever use it then. And so, there's so many things that you could be picking up here to go, actually, this is an opportunity to waste less, to maybe cut down on the food spend, but also the boxes we've talked about, like tick and diversity, tick and reduce stress, and ease of making something when time is a restriction on an evening especially. And I loved what you also said about getting curious with what you can eat in the different meals and swapping that around, because a lot of people go, I can't have a healthy breakfast because in the morning I just don't have time to be standing chopping fruit. Well, if your fruit's chopped and it's in the freezer, then that overcomes that obstacle, doesn't it? So what and I know we could talk forever on all of this, but just maybe with some of the tips that you've found to be the most well received, like the things that when you've chatted to your audience and community that they've struggled with and gone, yeah, that's a really time saving or healthy eating kind of hack that I can take on board.
I mean, I think it's tricky because it is different for so many people. I would certainly say, which isn't really specifically what I do, but visiting their freezer aisle and just giving the frozen, the pre-prepped frozen produce a chance. Because although there may be some things that are not your cup of tea, and there are some products where I go, like frozen broccoli from the supermarket is just not the same as fresh broccoli. Like if you're making a soup, it's great, but like I can fully appreciate, roasted shop bought frozen broccoli. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
I would say broccoli that you've blanched and frozen yourself at home and roasted, very nice. It's not nearly as battered or as waterlogged. It can be really tasty. But there is so much variety now. So if people are, obviously I want people to do what I do in terms of using, organizing the freezer, using it as a pause button to save their food, to save their money. But as a very first simple step, just looking at how the freezer can be used to introduce those better, those better for us ingredients. So you've got your broccolis and your carrots and things, but also they've got things like edamame beans now, and the mango, like frozen mango is great. It's really nice, and frozen pineapple and frozen berries, and a lot of the shops are starting to introduce things like frozen berries in punnets instead of in bags, so they're not as crushed and broken up. And I think, just looking and seeing, actually, are there any products that could make my life easier using the freezer that would just help me introduce more goodness, just, even if it's just one plant. And also, actually, on top of that, I will I will add, because it's something that not many people are aware of. If you're doing the 30 plants or anything like that, and you're trying to introduce more nuts and seeds into your diet, obviously that's not something you would usually buy in the freezer aisle. But you should actually be keeping nuts and seeds in the fridge or in the freezer. So particularly, things like walnuts, they're really high in fat content in oil, and if they get too warm, that oil will turn rancid. The fats will turn rancid. The flavor will change. The texture will change. And they're not cheap. Like
Yeah.
pine nuts and things for my daughter for pesto pasta, and it's like, how much?
Yeah, pine nuts, especially pine nuts and pistachio. If you want the shelled pistachios, are very expensive.
So expensive. And I think, but their nuts and seeds are such a quick win. They're such an easy way to introduce that little extra bit of goodness to our diet. And that's something that I'd say, even just in the last month to 6 weeks, I've started looking at dishes that I'm having and going, oh, could I sprinkle a handful of seeds over that? Like, could I add some pumpkin seeds? Could I add, some sunflower seeds or something like that? And it's just funny because it's that extra goodness, but actually I think it makes a lot of the meals far more enjoyable. Like, it adds a little bit of extra crunch, that extra texture. And I think it's a really simple way of sort of introducing that extra bit of goodness without it being a total shock, or without it being a totally new recipe or anything like that. We can look at things that we're already making and see, could we add, even if it's things like making a bolognese and reducing down the beef content and replacing it with lentils, or putting chickpeas into chili or something like that, anything like that, where it's like, okay, I'll just try and add that little extra. And having that stash of nuts in the freezer or seeds in the freezer, or the fridge if you prefer, but they'll last twice as long in the freezer, so that's my go-to, obviously. But yeah, I would say that between looking at the freezer aisle and looking at, well, okay, what are the sort of plants that would be simple to bring into your diet and into the meals you cook, and then utilizing the freezer to make sure that they last for as long as possible, that none of them go to waste, and that you've got to think a bit of flexibility in how you use them as well. If it is something that's new to you and you're not completely confident in how you're going to use the whole quantity yet, then you can spread it out. You can make them really last. So yeah, I think that's what I go for.
And I'll give a few things that I've seen Kate share and focus on, because yes, she's all about helping you organise your freezer and use the freezer, but she gives really good tips on the way you can organise your freezer with different techniques for storage. You mentioned things like, for example, freezing the pieces of chicken first before you put them together in a bag. So she gives lots of great tips like that. There's food that I would never have thought to freeze, like eggs and milk. And I think there was a bit of controversy maybe over the eggs when you first put that out, but really good tips with that. And then also that you're sharing how to use them, because we're talking a lot here about plants, and when we are talking about freezing food and going to the freezer aisle, you've heard we're not talking about buying the ultra processed food. We're not talking about having things in the freezer that you pop in the microwave, pierce in the lid, for 5 minutes, and then you're munching on something that isn't nutritious and isn't going to fill you up and cost a lot of money. We're talking about optimizing your freezer to have ingredients at hand that are healthy, making sure you're not wasting them, but then also freezing food when you have made it. So Kate gives a lot of tips for the batch cooking and then freezing it after it's cooked. But also you help people to see how to use it. For example, one thing I used recently was your tip on freezing big chunks of red onion and peppers and then putting them straight in the air fryer from frozen. Now, I'm quite an air fryer fan. I love the air fryer for so many things. We're constantly finding new things to do with it. And that was one that was kind of wow, light bulb moment. That's brilliant. Let's do that. And I can't remember the occasion. It was literally in the last couple of weeks where we did that. And so you give lots of tips, and so it's, yes, the freezer, but then it's okay, well, what do I then actually do with this stash that I've got in the freezer, isn't it? To help people actually use it and optimize it so that it doesn't die a slow death in the freezer over several years.
That's it. And I think it's really important to flag up as well, if people are freezing individual ingredients that are uncooked items of food. So if you've frozen the onions, the peppers, whatever it is, and then you cook something up and you have leftovers, it's still fine to freeze those leftovers. So it's okay that they've been in the freezer as long as they've been cooked. And when you were talking before about, the thing of people kind of going, oh, I'm not keen on leftovers, I just bin them, like I never eat them anyway. I am a very strong advocate for freezing whatever leftovers you've got. If you're not going to eat them the next day, if they're going to disappear to the back of your fridge, grabbing a freezer bag and or a tub if you prefer, but I would usually flat freeze, so put it in, freeze it on a tray, sort of squished out, so that when you want to use it, it's really quick to just run it under the cold tap and get it into a pan or get it into a bowl, defrost and reheat. But the reason for it being like, well, whatever the portion size, unless it's literally like a spoon. But if you had one ladle of chili left and you went, well, it's, or half a ladle, it's not, oh, is it really enough? It's not enough for a proper dinner. Yeah, but if you wanted a quick lunch at home on a busy work day, being able to run that underneath the cold tap, get it out, get it into a bowl, into the microwave or into a pan on the hob, heat it through, and you serve it with a jacket potato, I even do sweet potato jacket potatoes, which are really tasty.
Yeah.
I was quite, it's like, you never think of doing a baked potato with a sweet potato, but it tastes so good and it's so much better for you, as I understand it. But doing that, or getting a wrap and adding a bit of rice and some cheese and some extra beans or something, cooking stuff up and making up a small meal, using something that you cooked previously that would have gone in the bin, and sort of reimagining those leftovers, giving them a new lease of life, like recognizing that you can add extra ingredients to your leftovers, whether it be more vegetables or pulses or a different meat even. If you've got something with chicken, you can add a bit of chorizo or something, or even herbs and spices to just mix up what it is. So you do need to be careful if you use the leftovers and you're adding new ingredients, not to overdo it and end up with leftovers of your leftovers, because you reheat things twice, which is something that has caught me out in the past, where it's like, oh yeah, no, my eyes were way too big on this one. Like, this is not a good call. But I think, starting to love those leftovers and just reimagining them, but not feeling like you have to eat the same. Loving leftovers doesn't mean you have to eat every day for the next 3 days. Like, you can press pause, get them in the freezer, and then when, I think especially those evenings when it's like your other half gets stuck at work or they go out for impromptu drinks or something like that, where you go, oh, well, I was kind of expecting to cook for two and now I don't really know what to have. If you've got those leftovers there, it's like, that is a massive win. And especially if you're guilty of, and this is one actually I've shared quite recently, I shared when I was on telly the other day too, that if you tend to always cook too much pasta or too much rice, as long as you cool them down quickly, so rice especially, I would run under the cold tap, or if it's a rice dish, I'd spread it out, but getting it cooled really quickly, and then I freeze it on a lined tray so it's in a nice thin layer, and then I'll store that in a freezer bag, or again it can be stored in a tub if you prefer, and then you can just take a bit as you need it. So if you were doing something like a wrap with some leftover chili and you wanted some leftover, you wanted some rice in there or something like that, instead of relying on things like the microwave rices, which it's not a bad product necessarily, but I don't know if any of them maybe have additives, but they're never quite the same as fresh, proper price. And they can, they're a heck of a lot more expensive. So I think, using your freezer to have those extra carb kind of bits there. And there is something as well, I'm not an expert on this, but I have it on the authority of a doctor. So I think it was Dr. Shintal, whose book came out recently, that when you freeze starches, so your rice, your pasta, and even bread as well, actually, and then when you heat it, I think it's starch retrogradation happens, and it becomes better for your gut microbiome, and I believe it lowers the glycemic index as well, or something. So that process of freezing can save you money, can be convenient, and can even be better for your health. It's like, what's not to love?
Exactly. And I think food is such a stress for so many people, and most people know that eating healthy is going to be a big part of making them feel better, and most people do want to feel better. They want more energy, they want more vitality, they want to protect themselves from future illness and disease. So everything you're offering here is all with that goal in mind, isn't it, of reducing that stress? Because I know from working with clients, thinking about what to eat when you get in from work is one of the biggest stresses that they have in their day. It's incredible how much stress it causes. So I think, I know you've given lots of tips through the conversation, but to kind of wrap us up, I like to give someone listening 3 simple steps that they could take. So, we've given lots of practical tips. What could someone do to get started building this habit of using their freezer, optimizing their food more, and reducing that stress?
So I would say, really, I'm reiterating kind of what I've said, but to put it concisely, I would say the first thing is to go to your freezer and have a bit of a clear out, a bit of an organize, get rid of the 9 ice packs and half empty fish finger boxes. No judgment on fish fingers as well. I have fish fingers, but get rid of the packaging, skinny it down to make some space. As a first step, I would then say give your freezer aisle a chance at the supermarket, see if there are any simple, convenient things that you could buy that would help you to bring those healthy foods into your diet in a convenient way. And then I would say consider what you're throwing out when you're attempting to eat better, when you're going to the shop and you're buying that fresh produce or the nuts and seeds, those things that you want in your diet. But if they're often ending up in the bin, stop and ask yourself, actually, that freezer space that I've now made, could I be using that to press pause on those foods so that when I come in after a long day at work, instead of having the temptation to order a takeaway, actually, I know I can grab a handful of this, handful of that, whack it in a pan, and I've got a pretty nutritious meal cooked with minimum effort, faster than a takeaway could arrive anyway, and, save yourself a bit of cash. So, that would be my steps, I would say.
And I think they're brilliant steps for someone to get started with, as well as all of the tips. So I'm going to show Kate's book for anyone who is watching. This is the full freezer method that you can buy, and it is packed full of great advice, as well as lots of space for the tasks and challenges that you give people to start working on this to build their own freezer optimization process and habit. But then for people to connect with you, I'll obviously put everything into the show notes, but honestly, I do really encourage you to connect with Kate and have a look at what she shares to get some more tips. Let people know where the best place to find you is.
Really, my main place is Instagram. So at the Full Freezer on Instagram, but you can find me on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all under at the Full Freezer as well. I would love for people to pop by and say hi, and let me know that you've come via this episode.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you again for your time and all of the incredible tips. I think there's lots that can really get somebody thinking here, because we know people are averse to using their freezer. We know there's this stigma almost attached to freezer food, whether it's freezing a fresh or freezing a cooked isn't as good. We know differently, and we know that it also, as we said, can bring lots of health benefits in many, many, many different ways. So yeah, I'm certainly a fan of the freezer, and think the way you're trying to help people see this through a different, set of eyes is a brilliant thing to be doing and helping people with. So thank you so much, Kate.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely, Nicola. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining today. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please remember to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. It would be massively appreciated if you could leave a rating and review to help other women discover the podcast and build their own healthy, happy life. If you're struggling with the changes perimenopause is bringing your way and you're ready to reclaim your vitality, to embrace this new chapter of your life with confidence and joy, then why not download our free guide, 10 Ways to Feel Good Again, your perimenopausal revival guide. Inside, you'll get 10 proven ways to enhance your well-being and rediscover the joy of living life to the fullest. And we all want to live a great life, don't we? So download your free guide now at lifenowcoaching.uk/feel good again. The link is in the show notes. You can follow Life Now Coaching on Instagram and LinkedIn, and visit our website at lifenow.uk. All of the links are in the show description. I really hope you've enjoyed today's topic and conversation, and can't wait to have you back again next week for more tips on living healthy and happy right now. Take care.